The courtroom was suffocating. I could feel every pair of eyes on me like needles pressing into my skin. The wooden benches creaked as people shifted in their seats, whispering behind cupped hands. My mother stood at the plaintiff's table, her face twisted in what looked like genuine anguish, tears streaming down her carefully made-up cheeks. Her voice cracked as she pointed directly at me. "Your Honor, my daughter is not well. She's mentally unstable. She needs help, not independence. She's making things up, creating delusions about me, about our family. I'm terrified of what she might do to herself or to others." Welcome to Big Sky Storytime. I hope you will like this story. Before listening to the story, I request you that if you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel and make the video a worthy one. Let's go to the story. The words hit me like a slap. My aunt nodded sympathetically from the gallery. My uncle looked at me with what I can only describe as pity mixed with disgust. Even strangers in the courtroom seemed to lean away from me, as if my supposed insanity might be contagious. I felt my throat tighten, my hands trembling in my lap. This was it. This was how my own mother would destroy me, by painting me as crazy in front of a judge, a courtroom full of people, and God himself. But then, Judge Margaret Thornton, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, leaned forward. The movement was subtle, but it silenced the entire room. She looked directly at my mother with an expression I couldn't quite read, skepticism maybe, or curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Mrs. Patterson, if your daughter is truly as mentally incompetent as you claim, why did she successfully manage a 6-figure trust fund for 3 years while simultaneously paying your mortgage and credit card bills?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. The tears stopped midstream, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw my mother's perfect mask begin to crack. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I ended up in that courtroom being called insane by the woman who gave birth to me. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I thought I had the perfect mother. That's what everyone told me anyway. Margaret Patterson was PTA president, church volunteer coordinator, and the woman who brought homemade cookies to every neighborhood gathering. She wore her blonde hair in a neat bob, always dressed like she was ready for a photo shoot, and had a smile that could light up a room. People loved her. At home, things were different. Not dramatically different, not in ways a child could easily identify or explain. It was more like living in a house where the temperature was always slightly wrong, where you could never quite get comfortable. She'd hug me in public and critique every aspect of my appearance in private. She'd tell friends I was so talented, so smart, so special, then spend dinner listing all the ways I'd disappointed her that day. "You really should lose some weight, sweetie. That dress would look so much better if you just tried harder. I told Mrs. Henderson you got straight A's. You did get straight A's, didn't you? You wouldn't want to make me look like a liar. My father and I have sacrificed everything for you. I hope you appreciate that. I hope you don't take it for granted like some children do." My father. God, my father. He died when I was 23, just 2 months after I graduated from college. Massive heart attack in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He was only 51. The grief nearly destroyed me, but it absolutely demolished my mother, or so I thought at the time. She wore black for 6 months. She cried at random moments. She'd call me in the middle of the night, sobbing about how empty the house felt, how she couldn't go on without him. I moved back home to help her. I put my own life on hold. I slept in my childhood bedroom and held her while she wept, and I told myself this was what good daughters did. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover for another 2 years, was that my father had left me everything. Not her, me. The house was in a trust with my name on it. The life insurance policy, $400,000, was designated for me. His retirement accounts, his investments, his savings, all structured to support me with the understanding that I'd take care of my mother. My father had been careful, deliberate. He'd met with lawyers and financial advisors. He'd set everything up to protect me, and my mother had been systematically draining it all. I found out by accident. I was organizing paperwork in my father's old office when I discovered a folder labeled estate planning, stuffed behind some old tax returns. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, notes in my father's handwriting, emails to his attorney. That's when I learned the truth. I was the primary beneficiary of everything. I was supposed to have control, but I didn't have control. My mother did. She'd convinced me in those early grief-stricken weeks that she needed to handle the finances because I was too emotional and not ready for that kind of responsibility. She'd had me sign documents I barely read, papers that gave her power of attorney, that made her the executor, that essentially handed her the keys to everything my father had built. And she'd been spending it, lavishly. New car, home renovations, expensive vacations she called grief retreats, designer clothes, jewelry. She'd given money to my aunt and uncle, loans that would never be repaid. She'd donated thousands to the church where everyone adored her. Meanwhile, she'd cried to me about how tight money was, how we might have to sell the house, how she didn't know how we'd make ends meet. I confronted her on a Sunday evening. I remember the date, March 14th, because it was my father's birthday. I'd spent the afternoon at his grave, and I came home angry, grieving, ready for answers. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's estate." She looked up from her wine glass, her expression immediately shifting to concern. "Oh, honey, is this about money? I know things have been tight, but I found the documents. I know what Dad set up. I know I'm supposed to have control of the trust." Her face changed. Just for a second, I saw something flash across it. Anger, maybe, or fear. But then the mask came back, and she started crying. "How dare you? How dare you come into this house and accuse me of what exactly? Stealing from you? I'm your mother. Everything I've done has been for you, for us. Your father would be ashamed of you right now." That was her specialty, twisting things, making me the villain, weaponizing my father's memory. But I didn't back down this time. "You've spent over $200,000 in 2 years. The trust is nearly depleted. You bought yourself a Mercedes, Mom. You renovated the kitchen twice. You gave Uncle Rick $30,000 for his business investment. This isn't taking care of us. This is... Get out." I blinked. "What?" "Get out of my house. If you're going to stand there and call me a thief, if you're going to disrespect everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed, then you can leave right now." I left that night with 2 suitcases and my laptop. I stayed with my best friend, Jenna, who lived in Cleveland, and the next morning I called a lawyer. That's when things got really ugly. My mother didn't just fight my legal challenge, she went nuclear. Within a week, she'd filed a petition for conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and needed a guardian to manage my affairs. Her evidence? A handful of therapy sessions I'd attended after my father's death, texts I'd sent her during panic attacks, and a journal entry I'd written at age 16 about feeling depressed. She hired Dr. Raymond Chen, a psychiatrist I'd seen exactly 3 times 2 years ago, and somehow got him to write a letter suggesting I might have significant mental health concerns that could impair judgment. She compiled screenshots of emotional text messages, took quotes out of context, and built a narrative that I was unstable, delusional, and potentially dangerous. She told our extended family I'd had a breakdown. She told the church I was making false accusations because of unresolved grief and possible mental illness. She cried to anyone who would listen about her troubled daughter who needed help but refused to accept it. And people believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was Margaret Patterson, pillar of the community, devoted mother, grieving widow. I was the daughter who'd moved out suddenly, who was suing her own mother, who was clearly going through something. My aunt called me a disgrace. My uncle stopped returning my calls. Church friends I'd known my whole life sent messages about praying for my healing and suggesting I seek God's forgiveness. Even some of my own friends started questioning whether I was really okay, whether maybe I was overreacting, whether perhaps my grief had twisted my perspective. I spent nights curled up on Jenna's couch, wondering if I was crazy, wondering if maybe my mother was right, maybe I was making things up, maybe I was broken, maybe I was the problem. But then my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves who'd seen cases like mine before, sat me down and said something I'll never forget. "Sarah, gaslighting is abuse. Financial exploitation is abuse. What she's doing to you right now, trying to make you doubt your own sanity, turning everyone against you, using the legal system to maintain control, that's abuse. You're not crazy. You're being systematically manipulated by someone who's very, very good at it." We built our case carefully. bank records showing the transfers, emails between my mother and her financial advisor discussing managing Margaret's inheritance, not mine, hers, records of expensive purchases made with trust funds, documentation of my father's clear intentions, testimony from his estate attorney about the careful planning he'd done to protect me. We also got my own psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Linda Morrison spent hours with me, reviewed my complete history, and concluded in writing that I showed no signs of mental incompetence, no delusional thinking, no impairment of judgment. Yes, I'd experienced grief and depression after losing my father. That was normal, but I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. Still, I was terrified going into that courtroom because I knew my mother would put on a show and I knew she was good at it. She did not disappoint. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sickly. My mother arrived in a black dress with a pearl necklace, looking every bit the grieving widow and concerned mother. She'd brought my aunt, my uncle, and 3 family friends for support. They sat behind her like a choir of character witnesses, ready to sing her praises. I sat at the defendant's table with Patricia, feeling like I might throw up. I'd barely slept the night before. I'd changed outfits 4 times that morning, trying to look competent and stable and normal, whatever that meant. My mother's attorney went first. He was a tall man in an expensive suit who spoke in the kind of smooth, reasonable tone that made everything sound rational. He painted a picture of a young woman who'd never quite recovered from her father's death, who'd become paranoid and accusatory, who'd convinced herself of a conspiracy that didn't exist. Then he called Dr. Chen. Watching him testify was surreal. He talked about our 3 sessions like they'd been intensive therapy. He emphasized my emotional volatility and difficulty accepting reality. He suggested I might benefit from more structured care and supervision. Patricia objected multiple times, pointing out that he'd only seen me briefly 2 years ago and had no current basis for his claims. But the damage was done. Then my mother took the stand. She cried immediately, real tears streaming down her face, her voice shaking. She talked about how much she loved me, how worried she was, how she'd tried to help but I kept pushing her away. She described me as angry, irrational, making wild accusations about money that she'd only been trying to manage responsibly. I've given my whole life to that girl. I've sacrificed everything. And now she's convinced herself that I'm some kind of villain, that I'm stealing from her. It breaks my heart. She needs help, Your Honor. Professional help, structure, guidance. I'm not doing this to hurt her. I'm doing this because I'm her mother and I love her. My uncle nodded. My aunt dabbed at her eyes. The family friends looked at me with such sympathy, such pity, and I felt like I was drowning. When Patricia cross-examined her, my mother had an answer for everything. The Mercedes? A necessary purchase after her old car broke down, and she'd gotten a good deal. The kitchen renovation? Long overdue repairs that increased the home's value. The money to my uncle? A family loan that would be repaid. She made it all sound so reasonable, so normal. And then she looked directly at me with tears in her eyes and said, I forgive you, Sarah. I know you don't understand what you're doing. I know you're not well, but I'm still your mother, and I'll never stop loving you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone the truth about the years of manipulation, the gaslighting, the control. But I just sat there, frozen, feeling crazy. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe this whole thing was in my head. Then Patricia called me to the stand. I was shaking so badly I could barely walk. I took the oath, sat down, and tried to breathe. Patricia asked me calm, straightforward questions about my father's estate, about discovering the documents, about the money that had been spent. I answered as clearly as I could, but I could feel my mother's eyes on me the whole time, and I could hear her lawyer's skeptical tone during cross-examination. Ms. Patterson, isn't it true that you've struggled with depression? Yes, after my father died. And isn't it true that you've had conflicts with your mother for years? We've had disagreements, but... And isn't it possible that your grief has distorted your perception of events? I wanted to explain. I wanted them to understand, but every answer I gave seemed to confirm their narrative. Troubled young woman, unresolved grief, irrational accusations about loving mother. We presented the bank records, the emails. My father's attorney testified about his clear intentions. Dr. Morrison testified about my mental competence, but I could see the skepticism in some faces. My mother had been so convincing. And then, just when I thought it was over, just when I thought I'd lost everything, my mother made a mistake. Patricia had finished her closing argument. My mother's attorney was wrapping up his. The judge was reviewing her notes. And then my mother, perhaps feeling too confident, perhaps unable to help herself, stood up and addressed the court directly. Your Honor, please. My daughter is not well. She's mentally unstable. She needs help, not independence. She's making things up, creating delusions about me, about our family. I'm terrified of what she might do to herself or to others. I'm begging you, please grant this conservatorship. It's the only way to protect her. The courtroom went silent. It was such a dramatic moment, such a raw display of maternal concern. My aunt was crying now too. My uncle had his head bowed. Even the bailiff looked moved. That's when Judge Thornton leaned forward. She removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench, and looked directly at my mother with an expression that had shifted from neutral to something else entirely. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire courtroom. Mrs. Patterson, if your daughter is truly as mentally incompetent as you claim, if she's delusional, unstable, incapable of managing her own affairs, why did she successfully manage a 6-figure trust fund for 3 years while simultaneously paying your mortgage and credit card bills? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. My mother's face went blank. Her mouth opened slightly. The tears stopped as if someone had turned off a faucet. She looked at her attorney, who looked equally stunned. I don't, Judge Thornton continued, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. Mrs. Patterson, I'm asking you directly, how do you explain this contradiction? I watched my mother's face cycle through emotions, confusion, panic, anger, calculation. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Those payments were, I was helping her manage. By having her pay your bills? It was our agreement. We were sharing expenses. I was teaching her responsibility. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Thornton's voice was sharper now. I've reviewed every document in this case. Your husband left specific instructions. The trust was established for your daughter's benefit, with the understanding that she would have control. You were named as an advisor, not as the primary beneficiary. Yet you transferred over $200,000 from that trust into your personal accounts over the past 2 years. You made purchases that had nothing to do with household expenses or your daughter's welfare. And now you're claiming she's mentally incompetent? My mother's mask was completely gone now. Her face was flushed, her hands gripping the table. I am her mother. I was protecting the money. She wasn't ready. She was ready enough to support you financially while you spent her inheritance. The words landed like a physical blow. My mother actually stumbled back slightly. My aunt and uncle looked shocked. The family friends were exchanging confused glances. Judge Thornton put her glasses back on and reviewed her notes one more time. Then she looked up and her expression had shifted to something that looked like barely concealed disgust. I'm going to be very clear about my ruling. This petition for conservatorship is denied. Not only is there insufficient evidence of mental incompetence, but the evidence actually shows the opposite. A young woman who successfully managed significant financial responsibilities while apparently being taken advantage of by the very person now claiming she needs protection. My mother made a sound like she'd been punched. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, I'm ordering an immediate accounting of the trust funds and all related assets. Mrs. Patterson, you will provide complete documentation of every withdrawal, every transfer, and every expenditure made from your daughter's trust over the past 2 years. If evidence of financial exploitation is found, this court will not hesitate to refer the matter for criminal investigation. The room erupted. My aunt stood up, shouting something about how this was unfair. My uncle looked like he wanted to disappear. My mother's attorney was frantically whispering to her, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage. "You," she hissed. "You ungrateful—" "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Thornton's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "I suggest you sit down and be quiet before I find you in contempt of court." My mother sat down, but her eyes never left me. In that moment, I saw the truth of who she really was. Not the loving mother, not the grieving widow, not the concerned parent, just someone who'd been caught, who'd lost control, who'd been exposed. Judge Thornton stood, gathering her papers. "This hearing is adjourned. Miss Patterson, you'll be contacted by the court regarding the next steps in resolving your father's estate. Mrs. Patterson, I expect full cooperation with all requested documentation." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. I sat there, frozen, unable to fully process what had just happened. Patricia grabbed my arm, squeezing it. "We won," she whispered. "Sarah, we won." My mother left the courtroom without looking at me again. My aunt and uncle followed her, though my uncle paused for just a moment, giving me a look that might have been apologetic or might have been nothing at all. The family friends scattered like they'd just witnessed something they wanted to forget. I walked out of that courthouse into bright September sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight I'd been carrying, the doubt, the shame, the constant question of whether I was crazy, it was gone. Not completely, maybe. Trauma doesn't disappear with one court ruling, but enough. Enough to breathe. In the weeks that followed, the accounting revealed everything. My mother had spent nearly $250,000 from the trust. She'd transferred money to multiple accounts, made cash withdrawals, purchased items she later sold. She'd essentially treated my inheritance as her own personal bank account. My father's estate attorney helped me regain full control of what remained. It wasn't as much as it should have been, but it was mine. The house went into my name alone. I sold it a month later. I couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't walk through rooms that held so many complicated memories. My mother never apologized. She never admitted wrongdoing. Instead, she told everyone who would listen that I'd betrayed her, that I'd turned on her in her time of grief, that I was cruel and ungrateful. Some people believed her. Some always will. But most people, once they heard what happened in that courtroom, once they saw the evidence, started asking questions. They started remembering small moments, odd things she'd said, inconsistencies in her stories. The perfect image cracked, and what was underneath wasn't pretty. I don't speak to her anymore. I tried, once, about 6 months after the trial. I called her on what would have been my father's birthday, thinking maybe enough time had passed. Maybe we could find some way forward. She answered the phone, listened to me say hello, and then said, "You destroyed this family. I hope you're happy with yourself." Then she hung up. I'm in therapy now. Real therapy, with Dr. Morrison, working through years of manipulation and gaslighting and emotional abuse that I'm only now beginning to fully understand. Some days are harder than others. Some days I still hear my mother's voice telling me I'm broken, I'm crazy, I'm the problem. But then I remember that courtroom. I remember Judge Thornton's question, the one my mother couldn't answer. I remember the moment the truth became undeniable, when all the lies couldn't hold up anymore. I'm 28 now. I have my own apartment in Cleveland. I'm back in school, getting my master's degree. I have friends who actually care about me, who don't make me question reality, who support me without conditions. Jenna is still my best friend, still the one who stood by me when everyone else doubted me. And sometimes, when I'm feeling strong, I talk about what happened. Not for revenge, not to hurt my mother, but because I know there are other people out there who are being gaslit, being controlled, being told they're crazy by someone who claims to love them. I know there are people sitting in their own versions of that courtroom, wondering if they're imagining things, if they're the problem. So I tell them, trust yourself. Trust your memories, your experiences, your truth. Document everything. Find people who believe you. Get professional help, real help, not someone who's been manipulated by your abuser. And know that sometimes the people who call you crazy are the ones who are terrified you'll expose the truth. My mother screamed in that courtroom that I was insane. She cried and performed and manipulated, trying one last time to control the narrative, to control me. And maybe in another courtroom with another judge, it would have worked. But Judge Thornton asked the right question. She saw through the performance. She recognized the contradiction at the heart of my mother's story. And in the end, the only thing exposed in that courtroom was the truth. That truth didn't make me crazy. It didn't make me ungrateful or cruel or any of the things my mother called me. It made me free.